Well, hello everyone. I am that Weems guy back here for another episode. And let me tell you, the numbers are in, and this is the number one podcast recorded in my kitchen. That overwhelmingly, beat all other contestants. My apologies for there not being an episode last week, and but I was at TATCON, which made a lot of contacts there, spoke to a lot of people. So we lined up a lot of future episodes, one of which is the one we're recording right now with John Dobb. So John, tell everybody about yourself.
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for having me on. And it was awesome to see you and hang out with you last week at TATCON and all that. So, but thank you for having me on. I guess a little intro for who I am. My name is John Dobb. In this context here, I am, I guess my titles were like senior lead assistant instructor, something like that. I don't know, grand poobah over at KR Training, which is Carl Wren's group here in Central Texas. I've been working with Carl for about 13 years now. And I like I said, we live here in Central Texas, happy, great place to be and all that. And of course, you may have heard Carl and I wrote a book together, Our Strategies and Standards for Defense Handgun Training, available wherever fine books are not sold. You can get copies direct from us, signed and all that kind of good stuff too. But that's just a little bit about who I am and all that. So.
All right. John was a co-presenter at TATCON. He was part of a panel discussion with myself and frequent guest Eric Gelhaus, in which we did a presentation called The Aftermath. And John has been involved in a personal self-defense shooting. Eric was involved in an on-duty shooting. And then I discussed several deputy-involved shootings, as well as one that a private citizen shooting that I'm working as an expert witness right now, or that I did work as an expert witness. And basically, we each did about 30 minutes on that and then answered a bunch of questions. John, any just brief feedback you want to give on that, or any impressions?
Well, sure. So actually, it was interesting because for me, this was the first time I had met Eric in person, all that. And, I knew a little bit about his story, but, hearing the story directly from him was really impactful. And what I think was kind of funny was that we didn't put a whole lot of prep into this to the session. I had my story, you had yours. We made a couple little bit of slides, and you put the slides together. But it was really, I think the thing that really got me was that we were just kind of there and just doing our thing. It wasn't heavily organized, and so it came out very real and very organic. And I think one thing that really was impactful for me about it was seeing that, despite Eric having kind of like, one thing, despite like your deputies having their own thing and me having mine, how much of the aftermath, which was of course the topic of the session, how much the aftermaths were similar in terms of like what you as an individual and a human being have to deal with, issues of things like the mark of Cain that Masada Ayub has spoken about, how that's like a real thing. And, the need and the importance to understand, where your line is drawn as to, what you will do and when you will do it. What are you willing to die for, as they say. But it was really, that was a big thing that came out of me was hearing those, stories for someone for the first time, but then seeing how much we shared. And I think that helped, that made a very powerful impact on the audience, and I think on each other as well, to hear about that and to really understand the realities in the aftermath and what it all means, and how to hopefully have some means of being able to, I guess, be a little prepared for it, be better prepared for it, to be able to cope with it, to be able to work through it. So that was a big thing for me out of the whole thing. So I really enjoyed doing it, and thank you for asking me to be a part of that panel.
Well, thank you for playing along. I had heard your story on other venues, but it was fun to, well, I won't say fun is the right word. It was enlightening to be able to be in the room with you and have the discussion and hear the questions that were asked.
Yeah, absolutely.
It always is interesting to me how, when you're involved in an incident or you've had firsthand, so like my investigative exposure to an incident, and we tend to look at it in one light.
Yeah.
And then when you get the questions from like people who don't have that firsthand perspective, it's like, oh,
sure.
I'd never even thought of that.
Yeah, yeah. There were a couple of questions that came up that way, and I was like, yeah, no, I don't know. And of course, a lot of it's
Mhm.
the answer ends up having to be, I don't know.
Yeah,
But it does make you look at something a little bit differently, even after all this time. So yeah, it was a very enlightening couple hours that we spent there. So I dug it,
sure,
man.
sure. And you presented a block of live fire instruction as well, right?
Yes, I did 2 blocks on AIWB skills, which is, appendix carry is coming back, into because it's all cyclical. It was cool and then it wasn't, and then it was cool and then it wasn't. Now it's cool again, and so I did a couple blocks talking on that, which was it's all around just the kind of the fundamentals of what's involved, what makes AIWB unique. So talking about what it is, advantages, disadvantages, talking about equipment and the importance of having equipment that is specifically and exclusively designed for AIWB, as opposed to just getting whatever kind of crap holster off the shelf and just sticking it in front of your belly button and saying I'm done, right? And then working on the skills, the really core skills for AIWB specifically are getting the gun out of the holster and getting the gun back into the holster, and doing that safely. Because once the gun's out and all the shooting stuff, that's all the same. So it's really spending a couple hours talking about that and focused on that. And then actually, since what happened was that last year Spencer Keepers had to have some surgery and all that, and was going to be out for quite a while he recovered. And so Tom Givens asked me to step in and to teach. So I stepped in and did the AIWB blocks last year. They went over well. I was honored that Tom had me back this year, do it again. And what I've done in interim is I had taken a little 2-hour kind of, just TATCON block and expanded it out to a full, half-day class that we teach over at KR Training now. And we can go a little bit more, since we have more time, we can go a little more in depth and talk about equipment and techniques and things like, how to deal from a seated position. And, we can do a little more shooting and stuff like that. So, so that was a cool bit of live fire to be able to do at TATCON. So,
Yeah,
yep.
I find the 2-hour blocks at TATCON or any other similar type conference, I find them to be very challenging from the instructor standpoint. Is
Yeah.
I always overestimate what I can get covered in the 2-hour time period.
Yes.
And then when I get into it, it's like, oh, am I going to make it? And
Right.
I presented this year a block that I did 3 times last year, the revolver block. And even having done it 3 times already, I still came right down to the wire on the time as far as getting stuff in.
Yeah.
But it's I struggle with walking up onto the line and say, all right, I presume that every one of you knows how to draw from the holster.
Right.
And, and I learned my lesson the hard way on that. It's like, no, if we're going to have holster work in this class, I'm going to verify that everyone knows how to work from the holster before we begin with the other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So that's always a challenge, is to go back and do that. And, here's the thing. I did a safety brief because I can't leave it to chance.
Right.
Yeah,
you don't know what they don't know, what they've heard before or not, or are you Sunday morning and they've had 3 other live fire blocks and have already heard enough, or is this their first live fire block and they need to hear it? You don't know. But that's hard, because then it's like you want to go into safety really well, but you've got, but every precious minute is now being consumed, and it's tough to, like, even in this, I had to accept that, like, I am focusing on those core AIWB things. I'm telling people, like, I'm not going to be talking about your trigger, your marksmanship, your sight, your this. As long as you are being safe and keeping it like on paper, fine. That's all that really matters for this. I have to accept that we can't fixture this, we can't fixture that, we can't. There's just not time. I have to stay focused really, really well on that, and even be accepting of the fact that, like, all you can do in 2 hours is scratch the surface.
Yeah.
You just don't have the ability to go really, really deep into the topic in only 2 hours, because that's how it is. But yeah, I hear you on the the time challenge. It is absolutely a thing. It's hard.
One of the things that I've begun doing is I keep a file in the notes section on my phone that I call it, instructor thoughts. And anytime something pops into my head, just like random. If I'm sitting here right now talking to you and something comes into my head, based on something you say, I'll pick up my phone
Right.
and add it to my instructor thoughts file. And then stuff I see on the line, sometimes I pop in, or just anywhere else they come from. And one of them that I have to keep reminding myself is that terms are not universal.
Yeah.
And and things that you think people should know, they don't necessarily know or know by the same terminology that you use.
Yes.
And like
Yeah.
my first TATCON, I show up and I get ready to start teaching. I'm thinking, well, these people are at TATCON. They would already know all this stuff.
Right. Not
Not
necessarily.
necessarily. Not necessarily,
Not
because it may
necessarily.
be they've been to one class, or they're part of a local club or something that someone told them about the event. They sign up and they're
Oh,
coming
yeah.
to get that knowledge.
Right. Right. And it's
Yes.
especially true because I think Tiff said that the number of people who TACCON is their first TACCON was like 42%
Yeah.
of the attendees, something like
Yeah.
that. So when you got basically half the people there, this is their first time. That doesn't mean that obviously they're inexperienced or anything,
Right.
but it is one of those sorts of things, at least, that you can figure the people who have probably experienced at TACCON are probably, you can make maybe
Right.
some of those assumptions about, but half the people you don't know what you can assume about. And yeah,
Right.
they can be all the way down at this is my first,
Right.
literally.
If I'm
Yeah.
teaching a block and I walk up and the line is like you, Carl, Dave Rychek, and I'm like,
Right.
okay, I
Like,
know
okay.
everybody on this line because I've seen them in all these other classes. Okay, then we might be
Right.
able to go that stuff. But when I'm having to read name tags,
Right.
okay, that's okay. We need to, if I don't know who they are, I can't presume what they know.
Correct. Yeah. And so
That's,
it always makes fun time.
yeah,
This is a
yeah,
little peek behind the curtain here into the struggles of the instructor life, right?
right. The match was interesting. And we may
Yeah.
talk about that in some of your material we're going to discuss later, as far as like a minimum competence standard.
Sure.
I am happy to report to the audience that I did make the final 16 in the shoot off, and I was the high-low man.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, you were.
I got a phone call this week. Says, so what is the high-low man at the event? I said, well, it means I was smart enough to take the wrappers off the crayons before I ate them. And
That's right.
so that's how I won at that. Now, I will say that that award was based on the points match, not the shoot
Yes.
off. John
Right.
Hearn did advance further in the shoot off than I did. But I would have been okay.
But you beat him on paper, and that's what
Yeah.
mattered.
Yeah, I beat him on paper. And then, yeah, so long as I beat Hearn is my
That's
first
right.
thing. And it turns out that Hearn actually beat Hearn in the shoot off. Because
What?
Yep. Tim
Well,
Kelly.
I was standing all the way in the back, way underneath in the shade, so I couldn't
Yeah.
hear everything that was going on. And there were a few
Yeah.
times we were looking like, what happened? We didn't know what was
Yeah.
that? What happened?
Tim Kelly had John down 1-0. And
Okay.
so it was best 2 out of 3. On the second string, John got out to a huge lead on Tim, and then John shot Tim's crossover popper. That's why Tim kind of like
that's what happened.
did a what, yeah. And so
Okay.
John eliminated himself. And
so because I saw it, and we're like, what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
Why? That was only 2. That wasn't. It shouldn't have. Why is this? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That got it. Okay.
Yeah. So
Oh,
that has
man.
led to a lot of great jokes throughout the week.
Oh,
I think the best one, we have
good.
to give an award to David Cagle for coming up with the best one. Because John's keynote lecture is who wins, who loses, and why. And so
Right.
Cagle sent out an advertisement for who wins, Tim Kelly, why. Who loses, John, why.
That's good. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Cagle. That's a great one, dude. I got it.
Yeah. And of course, I had to chime in. Well, so long as John Hearn beat John Hearn, everything's okay.
That's right. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I
loved it.
Tim Chandler lost a string because he shot his mannequins out of order.
Out of order, yeah.
He lost a string to that, and man, the pressure is on in that shoot off because the line between the two is not that thin. I mean, it's thin.
It's razor thin. Yeah.
And
Well, I even remember watching, what was it? There was the one where it was Tim Herron and Kirk. And that was really interesting to watch because I'm watching Kirk and I'm seeing how he's going. And I'm seeing what was really interesting to watch was that I've seen him shoot. We've known each other for years. I've seen him shoot a lot. And it was really interesting to just watch suddenly where he suddenly knew how he couldn't give a millisecond up, and watching like, wow, Kirk just suddenly ratcheted up his draw. And it was just wild watching that go, just how he just, hit, he got the command to go, boom, and how he just exploded and moved so quick. It was a thing of beauty to watch, actually, to watch the two of them going head to head like that. So
yeah,
it's pretty cool.
and even if you go back to the points match, the difference between, say, the top 25 and maybe even going farther out to the top 50 is so razor thin that we could go do that again tomorrow, shoot the exact same match, and it may flip on its head as who the top 16 are and make the shoot off.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah. It's astounding when you look at the actual numbers how small the range is between the first and the last, if you will. It's really astounding. But it's great. It's great being around people of that high caliber and quality, and watching them perform. So it's really cool. So, and it's actually, real quick on the match, it's funny. So like, I shot the paper match, and on paper, I did not do very well. Because I dropped a couple points, but the thing that was interesting for me about that was I'm actually really cool with it, because what happened was actually it was Eric and I were literally the last people to shoot the match, because I didn't have time because of schedule and teaching and whatnot to be able to shoot the match before that. So it was literally after our presentation on the aftermath, and then Eric and I hustled over to be able to go shoot the match. And so my head is somewhere else. I absolutely not, my head was not in the match, not this, not whatever, which is, oh, here I am suddenly to show up and shoot. But I was really, really happy though with like the actual performance on paper, like what I did shoot, where, because like in the tiebreaker, like I dropped 3 shots, but they were literally just outside the circle. So yeah, it, hammered me on points, but if this wasn't for points, it would have been most acceptable, right? And all I thought to myself as well, if this is then, where my skill level degrades to when I am so thoroughly distracted and have other things heavily on my mind and whatever, but this is the level I degrade to, yeah, I can live with that just fine, and which, here, great segue about minimum competency now, shall we?
Funny with that is I learned that lesson in the year we were in New Orleans. Is I finished doing a classroom presentation and went and put my stuff back in my truck and walked to the social tent and sat down, and it was like with John Johnston and Spencer and a couple other guys, and we start talking and we're like, hey guys, let's go shoot the match. And I walked right back out and grabbed my stuff and walked down to the range with them, and my mind is still in the classroom. Everything that went on with the presentation, and I didn't make the shoot off. And if I had waited, say, an hour and walked in there and done that, I don't know what I would have done, because that's the only time where I've shot the match since we've been doing this format that I have not made the shoot off. And that just
shows that your head's elsewhere, and what it shows how it affects performance. But even if it doesn't do that, you can still look at your performance relative to your normal performance and the greater notion of it all, and still see that your performance is still quite acceptable. It just didn't make the shoot off, but that's so high end. So, so that's an interesting thing. But yeah, like I said, it's a good transition to our topic for today, right?
All right. And our topic today is minimum competence. And first, John, I know you want to explain that minimum does not mean low standard. So let's get into that.
All right. Well, so let's see here. Let me give, I guess, let me give some history on all this and explain what I mean when I talk about minimum competency. So when I'm talking about minimum competency, what I'm talking about is that when it comes to the use of a pistol for self-defense, that minimum competency in that context is the least amount of skill or ability that is needed in order to use that gun successfully to be able to defend yourself. So in many regards, it is looking at mechanical skills. Yes, there's 80 million things that we can look at out there, but I'm trying to focus on one thing in particular. And so where this all came from, this is actually kind of fun, is it would have been, October 2010. I had taken Combative Pistol 2 with Tom Givens. And that was the class that really, I think it made a huge impact on me. It's where I started really understanding like the notion of the importance of the first shot and how, how crucial that is. It's where I really started thinking about this notion of something, and I don't know if I'm truly the one who coined this term, but this notion of unacceptable hits. Because it's not about misses. It's about, because you have to realize that, every bullet that goes out, it hits something, right? You hit something always. It's just a question then of whether that's acceptable or not, So I've been trying to use, I've been trying to champion a term of, acceptable hits and unacceptable hits, right? Only hits count. Well, only hits matter. Well, no, only acceptable hits matter, because if you hit him in the fat roll, that's a hit, but it's not really an acceptable one, right? So things like that. But the thing that really, really got me was, this would have been sometime in 2012, 2014. I don't remember exactly when it was, but that was a block of time when I worked. Actually, I've been a remote worker for most of my entire professional career. I have another life outside of this realm. I'm a software engineer. And I've been a remote worker, but for a couple of years, I ended up working for a shop in town. And I was out having lunch, and there was this lady who I'd known through, people, and all this. And she knew I taught at KR Training and what I'd done. And she wanted to come up to me and tell me how, she wanted to, I just got my carry license, and she wanted to show me a picture of her target. And it's a B-27 target that looks like it was hit by a shotgun blast, right? And she was very proud and very excited for what she did. And now, don't get me wrong, I am not disparaging or taking anything away from her accomplishment. That is a milestone. That is a thing to do, to have gone out and achieved that and made. I am not in any way putting that down. But what I remember was, at that time, one thing that hit me was, wow, she's speaking in a manner as if she's done. I have achieved. I have my license. The state has given me their blessing. I'm done. I am good. I don't need anything else anymore. I have my permit from the Crown, and I have my little talisman, and I'm good, right? And what I had to realize was well, wait, if this is triggering something in me that is saying that this is, because I'm thinking to myself, look, this is insufficient. Because if nothing else, in the Texas carry license test, so it's called a license to carry. So when you carry a gun, at least the polite way that we can, first off, this implies that you're carrying in public, not in private around the house or whatever. It's in public. And if you're going to be the polite way to carry a gun in public is what? Concealed, which implies that you're carrying it in a holster. In a holster, right? Yeah. But there is nothing in the Texas test that has anything to do with concealment or holsters. Now, I understand why it's that way, and I am in no way advocating that we need to change or do that. There's reasons for it. But if you just think about it for a minute, if you're going to carry in public, this notion of how to conceal and how to draw the gun from the concealed holster and get it into play, that's a skill that is relevant to know and to be taught and to practice and to have some fluency at. And there's nothing in that. So it's this is inadequate. So I had to look at if we say that okay, well, this is insufficient, there's somewhere then along the continuum that things then become sufficient. What is that point when we go from insufficient to sufficient? What is that? And so that's what kind of started fascinating me. So then back in 2013, I got my Range Master Instructor certification. I've since got the Master Instructor certification, but that's back in 2013. I got the original one, and I started talking with some of my colleagues about it, and that's when this whole thing really, really started churning in my head a lot. And so I had some discussions then with Tom Givens, And then in July 2013, I published my first writing about this whole notion of minimum competency. Because what I wanted to try to do was I wanted to look at like, what is it that people really need? You know, you want people, because like that lady, she had a false sense of her skill. She really wasn't aware. And, you know, there's a whole Dunning-Kruger and you don't know what you don't know kind of thing. But if people don't know what is sufficient, well, and then people always throw out like, well, you need to be able to shoot this test, you can do that or whatever, like, you know, like whatever the latest hotness is right now of like, you know, 25 yards, you know, draw and, you know, drill out the X ring of a B8 at, you know, 25 in like a second and a half or whatever, right? I mean, if that's all you can tell people, like, yeah, that's the standard, that's what you need to be able to do and perform. What's your average person going to think about that, right? Yeah. Like there's you know, like there's some meme that goes around every time the Olympics are out, like saying like, okay, I'm just going to throw this out there. Could we just have like one normal person like participate in the event so we can like have somebody like gauge this against to know how good this really is, right? I was telling somebody that, and they actually said, yeah, I was using the Hsoi Bolt kind of reference, and they were like, yeah, we should just put like, I'm imagining Lee Weems running the race with Hsoi Bolt, and that'll give us a picture, and that certainly did give us a picture. Think about.
Hey, I did track in high school, sir.
You did? Oh, yeah. Fantastic. That's cool. See, so there you go. So you can do this. All right.
Now that was over 30 years and 100 pounds ago, but and it still would have been hilarious. It still would have been hilarious to see me to run against somebody who actually could run. But
right. But so, but the point being that like we have to accept that we are enthusiasts. And we are people who want to chase higher standards and who are always, you know, I think it's a great thing. It's a very human thing to want to try to always push the boundaries of human performance and human capability and what we can do. But there comes a point where, like, to achieve that, to get to those, you know, most elite levels of things, how much time, effort, work, sacrifice, money, resources, whatever you have to put into it in order to get there. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just that as human beings, everything we have is finite. There's only so much time, only so much money, only so much ability, and even only so much desire. You know, like I would love to be able to shoot like Tim Herron. But on the same token, I don't really have the desire to put in that level of like extreme effort to get there, because I've got a lot of other things that I want to be able to do and accomplish in my, you know, whatever I have left of life, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's just accepting that not everybody's in that position. And some people aren't in that position because of circumstance. You know, they've got to work, you know, 2 jobs and you know, they're single and they got to manage the kids and all this stuff. And they just don't have the time. But but all that aside, there's still something very, very worthwhile about making sure people have an earnest and honest assessment and knowledge of where their skills really are, towards trying to give them a really good chance of being able to successfully deploy and use their handgun if they need to. And because false sentences aren't going to be good for anybody, you know, thinking, well, I'll rise to the occasion and I'll be great and all that. You know, that's just not a thing. You know, we at KR Training in our defensive pistol skills 1 class, which is like the progression is like there's a basic 1, which is I've never touched a gun before. Basic 2, we give you basic marksmanship to get you to pass the license test. You get your license, then you come back for defensive pistol skills 1. And that's when we start teaching people how to draw from a holster, draw from concealment, you know, fast, accurate hits, and use 0 to 5 yard solution problems and all that. And one of the things we talk in there is about CHL versus reality. And there's a gentleman named Paul Ford. Paul was Austin Police SWAT for a number of years. He was involved in some shootings, and Carl had asked him for a bit of advice. Like, if you could tell one thing to people, you know, what would it be? And Carl said, well, and Paul said, you will do, in a gunfight, you will do 70% of your worst day at the range. So if you think about that, you know, you take a great day at the range, and now you got to take it down lower to your worst day, and now take it down lower to 70% of that. And you have to really realize like how high you actually really need to be able to perform, like what standard you really need to be at, so that when you do inevitably degrade, it's still pretty good. And this, like I said, this goes back to like what I said about the TATCON match, about trying to get my skill level up so that when degraded, and same thing like with you, when you had the same thing, your skill level's high enough that then when you degrade, it's still good, right? So it's about trying to achieve that, about trying to give people some real knowledge and some real talk about what it is and what they need. And obviously there's no guarantees of anything, no matter what we do, right? But trying to give people something decent enough so that then they can have competence in this. And through that competence, they are able to build their confidence in what they need to be able to do when they need to be able to do it. So that's what this is kind of all about for me.
All right.
In just a few words.
All right. So then what is the line?
Well, the way that I've kind of broken it down was that originally, and still to this day some, but I've had some evolving thoughts on it, which we talk about in a little bit. But originally what I did was, if we want to know what that line is, let's look at data, right? Let's look at what's actually out there. And so at the time, back when I first did this work, the big data sets that we had were, Tom Gibbons' student data set. We had FBI data sets. We had DEA data sets. We had just a few others from people. This is the day before, YouTube, was loaded with all kinds of stuff for us to be able to see. And what we ended up seeing was that, we saw a lot of common threads. When you looked at these incidents, you see common threads like the distance, like about a car length. You'd see that there's usually plain clothing involved. So that means the gun's concealed. They usually occur in public areas. So that's like parking lots, shopping malls, things like that. Home happens, but it's rare. That you'd see like there was an average of 3 to 5 shots that were fired, and that multiple assailants were not an uncommon thing. So looking at the data and those common threads, you could see that like a typical incident profile was an armed robbery in some form. 1, maybe 2 assailants were likely, a distance of about 3 to 7 yards, and you had a limited response time, that kind of 3 shots, 3 yards, 3 seconds sort of thing, right? So if you start looking at all that and start analyzing through all of it, you start seeing that like this core skill or this core need is the ability to draw from concealment, to get multiple hits in a small area at close range quickly and using both hands or maybe one hand. And that's kind of where things settle. Now, of course, the question is, well, some of those things, what do they mean? Drawing from concealment is fairly, clear right there. That you need to be able to just draw from wherever you have your gun concealed. Getting multiple hits. And so this was, again, when the average was about 3 to 4 shots, it's about that, being able to get 3-ish hits. So really, in a lot of regards, what that comes down to is that you can shoot multiple shots and have, good recoil control and be able to manage that. In a small area, and this is an interesting one, because you start thinking, what is a small area? And I think what it ultimately comes down to is, of course, human anatomy. It's being able, so it's not just looking at, like, an 8-inch circle or a 6-inch circle or this. It's also looking at placement, like, like I said, a B-27 target. Yeah, you get a nice, you get an 18 by 24 inch, 8 ring that's very low on the torso, and that's just not that great. You want things that are anatomically correct into vital areas and work to replicate that size and shape. So circle isn't even always the best one. You might look more at something maybe trapezoidal when you start looking at like how the heart and lungs are kind of actually shaped and placed in the body and things like that. But that small area, close range, this is actually one that's kind of interesting, but if it's going to be an armed robbery of some sort, they're going to be up close to you. It's going to be somewhat in, touching, bad breath distance within a step or two. So up to that 5 yards, within a car length kind of thing. So 5 to 7 yards at most. Like here in Texas, we all got trucks, so it's probably 7 yards more. And then quickly, everything unfolds very fast. And so when you start looking at things, and what's been interesting is now with lots of closed circuit video footage out there, we can see about how quickly things evolve. And don't know what quickly necessarily always equates to, But again, we start thinking about this 3 shots, 3 yards, 3 seconds, and that tends to be a lot of where things fall down. We could start talking about other things like, draw to first shot times and stuff like that. But that's a lot of what that's kind of the core breakdown of where I originally started looking at what minimum competency ends up involving in this particular context.
Okay. Well, that draw to first shot time is always a hot topic. So what do you think is the minimum standard people need to meet?
Oh, that's always a fun one.
Yeah.
Well, what
and I'll give you a minute to think about that, because I'm going to ask another
Sure.
question on top of it. Did you see a
Okay.
sub-second draw in the TATCON match, in the actual shoot off?
Oh gosh. Okay, so well, obviously with no timer, I can't say for certain. I am not sure that I saw a sub-second. Well, I'll say this. I saw sub-second reaction times, but I don't think that I saw a sub-second, like if you put a timer on it, I don't think any first shot would have been sub-second. Because definitely I saw reactions and getting the gun out of the holster and people were moving.
Mm-hmm.
But they all you could see them all taking that moment to make sure their sights were squarely aligned so that that first shot was right where it needed to be. No question. Even the fastest people out there were making sure that accuracy, speed was important, but accuracy was important to her.
Right. Because if you didn't, and for the audience, the way the match is set up, the shoot off is there are these big mannequins over steel plates, and you can't see the steel plate. They're in the upper center torso of the mannequin, but like I say, you can't see it. And if you don't hit in that exact correct spot, the mannequin doesn't fall over. And you have to knock over 3 of those before you shoot a crossover popper. And that's who determines who wins each string.
Mm-hmm.
And I know on the very first one, I shot against a guy named Zach Cox, who ended up finishing second. He eliminated me. I got on to him for beating up on an old man. And on the first string, I won. I got out of the holster so fast, and my first popper was probably over before he was breaking his first shot, the first mannequin. And I hit it so fast that it surprised me. And I was like, it fell over. I was like, where did it go? Oh, it's supposed to do that. And then I moved to the second one,
right.
and I won that string. All right. On the next string, I took over my first mannequin, go to my second one, and I lost my dot. And had to slow down, find the dot, get it in the center of the mannequin, and then get the target over, and I couldn't catch up to him. On the third string, I actually got to the crossover popper before he did, and I missed the crossover popper. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that I manipulated my grip as I pressed the trigger, and I missed that shot. It actually went high of the popper, which means I held it, and which is my most common miss. And he caught up to me and beat me at that point.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't think either of us were actually on shot, like hitting that first knockover mannequin in under a second. Because I know I don't.
No, I don't think anybody was.
I know I don't have a sub-second draw. I was shooting from a level 2 duty rig, and in ideal circumstances, I'm about 1.3 there. And like I said, I knocked my mannequin over before he did, and I know Zach probably in ideal circumstances, probably down around a second on his presentation.
Probably
on the range to an 8-inch circle.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is not on the range to an 8-inch circle, right? Yeah. This is a tougher thing. So that's, and I definitely, like I said, I definitely saw people who are capable of sub-second draws. They were moving that fast, but they were not shooting that fast.
Right.
Because they wanted to make sure they really got it. But that's why this is a really interesting notion about what is a good speed, because like it is a very important thing. Claude Werner, really talks about the importance of that first shot, because many times it's he who gets the shot off first, the acceptable hit, rather, I should even say, wins, right? But it's interesting that, like, so how much speed do you really need? But I think it was Kirk had said something that was actually really interesting. Actually, let me see if I could find the little quote here, because this was where was this? I can't find the quote real quick, but what it was functionally that when you do have something faster, when you have a faster draw, it gives you this ability that you can put the gun away and know that if you need to get it back out, you can, and you can get it out
Mhm.
quickly, as opposed to, now granted, if it's already in your hand, that's the fastest draw you'll get. But there's something about how that plays in when everything is being counted for in, tenths of a second. Uh, and those things end up mattering. That's an interesting thing. So I it's the kind of thing where I think like, well, I can maybe give you a number that I think is maybe good as a place to start for a draw to first acceptable hit speed. But there's always something saying about like having more gives you more options, right? So to answer your question, here's the way I can look at this. So what all the stuff I talked about previously is like where my original like thinking and research on stuff went. And this was back, whatever, 9 years ago. It was actually after TATCON. I think about it, every now and then over the years, I think about it and I poke at it, I do things. But it was actually after TATCON last year, based on something actually that Claude Werner ended up writing about, that really inspired me to step back a moment. And I really spent a lot of time contemplating the importance of that draw to first acceptable hit. And so I think I've refined my thinking a little bit, that it's not that I think like, multiple hits are not a minimum part of minimum competency. I think, the ability to get multiple hits is still an important thing to do. But I think that there needs to be an emphasis on that draw to first acceptable hit skill. Like I said, if all I can do is teach somebody an afternoon, like I don't have time to teach them recoil management, but I can sit there and teach them to get a really good draw to first acceptable hit. Well, I'll focus there, right? As opposed to divvying my time. And so what happened was, as I did all this stuff, I started quantifying. See, the struggle for all this was always thinking, hey, is there a good set of drills out there that people could shoot to then say, yes, if you can shoot that and do that, you're minimally competent or whatever, right? And I looked at things like, say, the 5x5 from Gila Hayes, which is a good drill, but it's not really applicable here. It's kind of sub-minimal because, again, it lacks things like drawing from a holster and stuff like that. You look at like the Texas license to carry test, and again, like I think that's sub-minimal because, again, same things. It lacks those. It lacks small area and it lacks the draw for concealments parts.
Yeah.
So I've been looking around, and I have some things over time that I've talked about. Even like KR Training's 3 seconds or less test it's really good. I really like that. But there's some approaches that it has that I think get a little sub-minimal. Like it talks a lot about a lot of one-handed shooting. There's reloading. There's a lot of movement and other things, which I think are good. But I could argue are perhaps supra minimal. They're more than. They're extra things that maybe you can learn in a second session as opposed to a first session kind of thing. So like all people with an ego, your ways are terrible and my way is the best. So what I did was I started working on something that I'm calling a minimum competency assessment. And so it's actually a course of fire that I have designed to try to be something that attempts to quantify what might be a fair minimum at addressing these issues and trying to give people some kind of metric to go by. I don't know if I've necessarily achieved it. I'm putting it out there because I really want to hear people's thoughts on it. Like when I presented at TATCON last week, it got some good feedback, some good return. I posted the write-up of the course of fire, and a number of people, they're actually saying that they're going out this weekend and they'll go shoot it and they'll let me know how it goes. So we'll see. But I beta tested it with a lot of people and came up with a lot of things. And based on that, plus, seeing hundreds and hundreds of students over, a decade plus of teaching people. And so one of the things I thought was a reasonable, and the other thing that actually here, for those of you who want to be good math nerds, if you actually get a copy of mine and Carl's book, Strategies and Standards for Defensive Handgun Training, one of the things that Carl has in there that's really neat is he talks about a way to do formulas and determine drill difficulty. What you do is it looks at like, if we look at if the bottom end of the scale is 0, somebody doing nothing, and the top end of the scale are the limits of human performance, you could look at that as being like USPSA grandmasters, right? They're the people who can push the performance to its highest end. And so Carl basically was able to take a lot of the core components of skills, draw, reload, time between, split times, things like that, and say, this is how a GM performs. And this is about the expected rate at which they can perform, number of seconds, tenths of a seconds, whatever it is. And then from there, you can start using that, and you can break down and look at drills, and you can break down all the component parts and all the component things and start figuring that out. And then you can graduate it and say, like, well, if that's, GM 100%, what is, somebody shooting at 50% level and things like that. And you can start figuring those numbers out.
Let me interject here for a second, though.
All right, interject.
All right, if we're saying this is what the GM can do, isn't that kind of saying this is what the Olympic athlete can do?
It is. Well, but that's why we scale it.
Right.
That's why we want to scale it. So to that, let me put it to you this way then. If we start looking about on tables and charts, and when we look at other established data that we have about human performance in shooting, we end up seeing that, like, what I started looking at it was when someone comes in for, like, if somebody shoots, I'll put it this way, if somebody shoots the KR Training 3 seconds or less test as it's written and passing at the 90% level,
right, that's
approximately like someone performing at about 50% of GM level skill. And like I said, I've seen people shoot this over and over and over again, hundreds of thousands of times. And I can see what that is. And then if we say, like, well, they're passing at that, which is our defensive pistol skills 3 level, let's go to our DPS 2 level, and then let's back it even down to like our DPS 1 level. And you start saying that's like about maybe 35, 40% of GM performance-ish. And so when you start doing the math on that, and you start seeing that, like, okay, well, let's say you're at 3 yards, draw and, 1 to, the 8-inch circle or whatever, like about 2 seconds is possible. And about, if you go to about 5 yards or 7 yards, about 2.5 seconds or so is not bad. And then when you start looking at, like, that as a number of just a performance of where people are, what they can do, and you say, well, now let's start looking at some real world things and looking at them. And nowadays, we've got so many things, you got, active self-protection and the 80 zillion videos that they have. And you can really start looking at how long things actually take and what actually happens. And you can start seeing that if you can sit there and, put the gun into play in about 2.5 seconds, that's not bad as a minimum, as a place to start to give people things. Because, I see a lot of beginning students or a lot of early stage students, it takes them 2 seconds to just react to the beep, and to just even think about getting the gun out. So having that ability to go from the beep and get it done in about 2.5 seconds, depending on distance, etc., I assert is not a bad place to start as a minimum. And I should make clear, if I haven't made clear before, when I talk about minimum, I want you to understand that I don't mean low. Minimum is not a synonym for low. It is, you can still have a very high minimum. But I'm trying to see, again, like I said, getting places where something is realistic enough to be able to get things done. Because the other flip side is, you look at this, like, if you look at the 3 shots, 3 yards, 3 seconds thing, a 2-second draw and half-second splits, that's getting it done in 3 seconds, right? So a lot of things end up kind of working out. That number and that metric, again, is a reasonable minimum for people, I think. Because believe me, I see people draw a whole lot slower than that.
I think people that are deep into the training world and the competition world is, we tend to look at that level of standard as the norm, and it's just not the norm. And we take, so like Gabe White standards. I've taken Gabe's class 3 times, and I've seen someone hanging their head at getting a dart pin in that class. I'm like, dude, if you can shoot a dart pin on demand, you're doing quite well. You're handling yourself okay. I'll take you through a door with me.
Right, absolutely right. Well, it's funny. So in I actually have a quote from Gabe that
Mhm.
I have it transcribed here because I actually have my notes from
Yeah.
the presentation. Gabe says this. He said, "quote These are difficult performance goals intended for use by enthusiasts who are going to devote a lot of time, effort, and resources to practicing and getting better. They're probably a lot more difficult technical level goal than you would address unless you were an enthusiast. Again, these are goals, not standards, and they are
Right.
intended for use by enthusiasts. There are a lot of people who've really gotten the job done in real life, and they wouldn't reach any of these technical skill levels. They're very much intended for people who are self-motivated to do a lot of practicing and get as sharp as they can." End quote.
Mhm.
So even Gabe knows that this is for enthusiasts. And yeah, it's like if you can get a dart pin,
Yeah.
you're shooting pretty darn good. You
Yeah.
know.
I've taken this, like I said, the class 3 times. I've gotten a light pin
Mhm,
all 3 times. And
mhm.
for the audience, if you're not familiar, is the lowest level award that he gives is a dark pin, then it's light pin, and then turbo is for basically GM level standard on the test.
Mhm.
Um, I can shoot light pin on demand. I'm okay with that. I could go to the range right now and set
Yeah.
up a target array, and I could shoot you a light pin, uh, you know,
Mhm.
level on his test. Now I could go spend a lot of time and I could get to turbo pin standards, but I would have to
Right.
spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of expenditure to
Mhm.
get there and to be at my performance level the day he comes runs the test.
Right.
And then if I quit doing that, would I fall off? You know, I,
Right. Because
I'm talking about,
keeping that skill level is tough.
yeah, keeping at that level, where I could do the turbo on demand. That's a whole lot more work and a whole lot more expenditure that I'm willing to put into it. To me,
Right.
on that level, that set of standards, as long as I can shoot light pin on demand, I'm okay.
That's fantastic. Right. But that's the thing to realize here, and that's why I think this is such an important topic for us to talk about. That, like I said, we don't want people to be complacent
Right.
and be satisfied in mediocrity. But there's something about making sure that people have a real idea and a real notion of where they're
Mm-hmm.
performing, and that it's quote unquote good enough.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be turbo pin level. That, like, you don't need that in order to get the job done. Or the flip side on this, really, in my investigation, is like, well, do you really need turbo pin levels to get it done?
Right.
Because that's a reason. Like, I'm not attached to the answer of like, oh, I want it to be something like low. It's not that. I'm attached to an answer of, I want to know what to be minimally competent is. And if in fact it is, well, you got to be able to shoot turbo in order to get it done. Well, then so be it. And then we can use that to help us get where we need to go. But I think that, I think it's, if we're honest about things, like, that's cool and that's fun. And yeah, when you can perform at that level, you can have more options and you can do more things and whatever. But is it truly necessary? You know, um, I guess one way I tend to look at it
Mm-hmm.
is, it's that scenario of, you get a friend who's never shot a gun before, and they come to you and they say, yeah, I've got some crazy person, an ex or this or whatever, and they're giving me credible threats to my life. I've never thought about owning a gun before, but now I would like one. I know you're a gun person, please help me. Right. And now you've got a day, and in the morning you're going to the gun
Mm-hmm.
store to help them go shopping, and in the afternoon you're taking them to the range, and now you've got 4 or 5 hours to teach them what they need to know. What are you going to teach them? And what do you hope that they walk away being able to do? Like, is it really worth teaching them how to shoot moving targets out of a flaming helicopter while you rappel
Mm-hmm.
down, if they can't hit like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper at 3 yards? Right. What's important really to teach them? Is teaching them the different ways to do reloads all that important if they can't hit the target at 3 yards?
Right.
you know is that, but it's like, because I argued on that one. It's like, I'm gonna hit them this because, like, they're gonna do enough administrative loading and unloading of the gun. They're gonna know basically how it
Yep.
works. Yeah, they're not gonna have like Travis Tomasi level of like, getting it done in the blink of an eye kind of reloads, but they'll know how to do it. And that's okay. Because again, then the other data backing up is like, we rarely, truly rarely see reloads happening in private citizen gunfights. So is it really that crucial of a skill? Should they learn it eventually? Yeah.
Yeah.
but is it really a minimum what you need right now to get out the door to be something? You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like in my pistol craft class, I don't spend time teaching reloads. I encourage that you do a proactive speed reload, and I begin that early in the class. I do it in my demos. I begin encouraging students to do that. And then before we shoot the final exercise, I spend maybe 10 minutes on reloads, and probably 5 minutes of that is me talking about, okay, it doesn't matter how you send the slide forward.
Right. Right.
Here are all the arguments that people have over this. I don't care. Use one. Get the slide forward.
Get the gun working. Yeah, get the gun running again. That's all that matters.
Yeah, get the gun working. It doesn't matter. And the only reason I'm spending time on this is because you will see these arguments. And it doesn't matter.
You too can now enter the comment section.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like Weaver versus isosceles. Use one.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. What matters is getting the gun between you and the bad guy and getting effective hits.
Right.
Yeah. If you have to if it results to the point where you actually have to fire. Right. Getting a gun between you and the bad guy may be enough to make bad guy decide he needs to leave. Right.
And that's a whole other ball of wax, which has been interesting that of thinking like, well, because and then I think even more about mental competency, like one problem with this is it's very hyper focused on draw and shoot. Mm-hmm. But can we argue that a minimum skill that someone ought to walk, you got that 4-hour afternoon session, that the minimum skill they need to walk away with is, target discernment and knowing, what to shoot or not to shoot, to understand, the legal responsibilities and ramifications. There's, like I said, there's a zillion things. And so it's really interesting. That's why I think I'm so fascinated by this topic, because like I said, I've been intentionally honing in on one very narrow thing, but there's so much that we could start talking about that we could argue. We could even argue like, well, for you in your life, maybe it's more important that you should learn CPR because, you live with, your elderly mother or whatever. And, maybe it's more important for you to understand that as a minimum skill in life than anything with a gun. Right. So it's fascinating to me to think about all this stuff. So
yeah, there was one of the attendees at TATCON that was walking around asking people what they thought was the most important skill a person should have. And he came over and asked me, and as far as pertaining to carrying a firearm. And my answer was understand the legal environment surrounding the use of that firearm.
Yeah.
And it's like, so really that's what he was kind of like questioning me. It's like, if you want a hard skill, I'll come up with a hard skill answer for you. I said, but I really and truly, the number one thing that I think someone needs to know about carrying a firearm into the world is to understand the legal environment of using that firearm, because it's not the cops are going to immediately show up. They're going to look at the fact pattern and pat me on the back, high five me, everything's going to be okay.
Right.
And because we're getting into a world in which what the cops on scene see and think is okay is not necessarily going to be the legal charging decision. Because I can tell you, I've seen in my career, I've been doing this 23 years now. For the better part of my career, if I showed up on the scene of an incident, I decided no charges were going to be filed, that was the end of it. That's not the case anymore. That is not the case anymore, because, in the world of body cam, and I'm okay with body cams because they actually exonerate cops from false accusations more than they actually end up accusing, nailing them for bad things. But it's not just body cams. It's like the whole world is under video surveillance now.
Oh yeah.
And once that video hits and the court of public opinion starts hammering that, it's most places prosecutors are elected, and it doesn't matter if they lose the trial. What matters is whether or not they bring charges as far as the court of public opinion is concerned. And their answer is, well, I'll just bring the charges, and if the guy gets off, he gets off.
Right.
But
they can find their way to turn it and twist it. But yeah, that's Oh yeah, you are a pawn in their political game.
Right. I just did expert witness work in a case, and I discussed this in the aftermath.
Mhm.
The defense attorney was a cop for 14 years before he went to law school. I worked with him for all 14 of those years. He's sitting there going, I don't know why this guy's charged. Now, he's the guy's defense attorney, but he's looking at it from the cop perspective. I don't understand why this guy's charged. I took the case for free, traveled at my own expense to go testify on behalf of the defendant in this case, because once I looked at the case file, I'm like, why on earth is this guy being charged? I'm going to go try to help him. I came off the stand, and a completely unattached deputy in this other county who doesn't even work for the agency that worked the case, but he goes, it was city police. The courtroom deputy walks over to the defense table during a recess and goes, why on earth are we even here? Why is this guy charged? And so this is three old cops sitting around looking at this going, what on earth? But a DA has brought the charges.
Yep. And that's the thing. So it's so wide and vast to think about what you want people to really know and understand. When we've got so much information, and there is so much information out there to share, and trying to find the right ordering to make sure people get what they need, the right prioritization, because you can't give them all they need at the same time. The human mind, we can only like retain and process so much. So like, you can't give somebody here, I'm going to give you one afternoon, I'm going to give you a fire hose of everything you ever needed to know about firearms and personal defense and all this stuff. It's just not going to work. So trying to figure out what you need, because legal stuff, absolutely critical, very crucial to it. Understanding the aftermath, and that, like, you're not going to get to choose when and if it's going to happen. And then when it happens, you're not suddenly going to be able to go, oh, dang, now I wish I could join ACLDN or something like that. Right. For whatever it's worth. Yeah. I'm a member of ACLDN, and I don't get anything but love from them or whatever, because I'm happy to promote them and all that. But but things like that, groups like that, understanding that aftermath and what it will be. And then, even other skills, you could say, medical skills, or, like, even, like I said, you don't need to be some big trauma surgeon or anything, but just being able to maybe know how you could manage, like, if you did, understanding what direct pressure means, right? And how that might be useful to you at some point, right? Stuff like that. So I don't know. The biggest thing that I'm hoping really in having all of this talk about this is that it generates more talk. I want us to discuss this, because I think we spend so much time in our industry chasing high standards. I mean, think about it. We've all got, I've got trinkets on my wall here, right? They're always about high levels of achievement. And those are good to reward high levels of achievement. But that's the thing, is we're always talking about high levels of achievement. We're not talking to your Joe average, whoever person that just, if you will, that just wants to be left alone and take care of their family and come home at night and whatever. And they don't have all the time and the gumption, the energy, the desire, but they need to realistically know what they're dealing with and what their capabilities are. And, if nothing else, having milestones, because I think the nice thing about saying, if you're minimally competent, well, people may not like the minimal part, but realize it still means that you're competent. And isn't that what we want? So, all
right. So
I want us to have more conversations on this.
Sure. So I've got two lines of questioning for you then. And one is, make sure you've got your course of fire handy, because I'm going to ask you about the course of fire.
All right.
So number one, and you've probably already answered this, and we're going to focus just on the hard skill portion of it, not the things people should know otherwise. Number one hard skill, I'm bringing you, here's Bob. Bob's got a gun. He's just bought this. You've got 4 hours to work with Bob. What do you think he's got to know before he leaves the range today to be competent to walk into the world with his handgun?
First thing I say, and just focusing on pure, gun mechanical skills. The first is safety. Whichever rule set you want to use. I like to always keep gun pointing in a safe direction. Always keep finger off trigger, ready to shoot, all that. First thing is safe gun handling. Okay. And then I'd want to make sure that they understand safe and reliable manipulation of the gun. So just knowing like first off, parts of nomenclature. You were saying earlier, like everyone has, different terms and stuff like that. Let's make sure we agree on parts of nomenclature and things like that. Like it's a trigger, it's not a bang switch, and it's a finger, it's not a booger hook. Okay. But let's do that. Have a little bit of just understanding of this. How does a gun work? Because some people, they may, they just got the gun. They may not know. They don't know what this button is or that lever or that thing. They may not understand that, like, yes, you have to use the decocker, right? You don't just pull the hammer back. No, I know it's easier on the DASAs, right? But no, this is how it operates. So let's make sure they actually, like, whatever gun it is that they choose or chose or whatever they have, let's make sure they know how to use it.
Let me interject with a question there. I want to see if you get asked this question. From time to time, I teach a free citizens class through the sheriff's office for the citizens of our county.
Okay.
And one of the things, they come to a classroom session before we go to the range. And I'll show like the loading and unloading sequence of a revolver, and then the loading and unloading sequence of a semi-automatic pistol. And, semi-automatic pistols, magazine in, run the slide. And inevitably, in every session I get, so do I have to do the slide for every shot?
I haven't gotten that one. No, I have not gotten that one. But yeah, but that's the thing. But that shows that people just we all don't magically know this. We take it for granted that we know all this, especially if you grew up from, your earliest memory was going in the back pasture with grandpa and plinking tin cans or whatever, right? So you just know. But like that, like even part of those manipulations is things like how to load a magazine correctly. Like that's a thing we take for granted. Just that we know how to just sit there and just put ammo in mags. We know how to do that. But you're born knowing that. So all that basic functionality of this is the gun, this is the thing, these are the parts, this is how you operate, this is how you load it, this is how you unload it, this is how you verify that it is unloaded. Even little bits of range etiquette are, I think, important to give people. It doesn't have to be all the etiquette and all the things, but understanding things like, when you bench the gun, slide locked open, ejection port up, can be a very useful thing. Not to handle the gun people down range, what that's about, a little bit of range etiquette and all that, I think, is important to know. So that kind of like, that's very fundamental, is assuming that they know nothing or assuming I don't know anything about them, making sure that they know safety, making sure they know basics about the gun, how to operate it, how to manipulate it, how to do those things. After that,
let's stay on range etiquette for just a second. One of the things that I've learned the hard way, the difference between COP training and open enrollment training. And as I'm teaching like a very basic intro level open enrollment training class, when I do my briefing, I discuss with them that we do not leave the line without the instructor or the assistants knowing what is happening. All right, because my first formal training outside of, my father was an instructor in the military, but one of my first formal trainings, was all through law enforcement. The heavens would have opened if someone just walked off of a firing line.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, we'd probably still be doing push-ups or running, to the gate and back or something. And I did not go to a paramilitary law enforcement academy, but the wrath of God that would have befallen us had one of us done something like that. And like the very first open enrollment class I'm teaching through my company, is one of the students is on the line. He decided he needed to go to the bathroom and just like walked off the line. What's going on? Like, and I just need to go to the bathroom.
Okay, well, then say that.
Right.
But let us know.
Right.
Yeah, it's
then in the grand scheme of things, that's not a big deal. But now I've got divided attention. I can't be focusing on what's going on because all of a sudden I see this guy just leave.
Right.
What's going on with that? What's the other?
Right.
And so,
is there a problem?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
And
a whole host of things. Yeah.
And so we go over that it's okay. We stay on the line.
Or you're
If you,
dismissed
yeah, and do like, we don't bend over and pick up things until whoever's calling the
until we're
commands tells
told.
you that it's okay to bend
Right.
over and pick up things. We stay
Right.
on the line, toes on the line. If for
Yep.
some reason you need to leave, you get one of our attention. We'll come
Yes.
over and tell, and then so that way we all know what is happening.
Yes. Yes. That's no, that's the,
Yeah.
we totally say, we do the same thing at KR Training, that
Right.
we'll let, if you need to go off the line for some reason,
Right.
like that's cool.
Right.
But, we tell people, it's like, look, we got 88 acres around here. We don't need
Yeah.
people just randomly wandering
Right.
off, or, that you wandered
Yeah.
off. Like, you should be wandering off because you told us, not because
Right.
suddenly it's now July and it's 100 degrees out and
Right.
you are suddenly having a bad reaction and you just wander off. So
Yeah.
like, we're going to see wandering off as a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to tell it, like, it's cool if you got to go to the bathroom, that's
Yeah.
cool. Just you got to wait till you're not on the line in the middle of something,
Right.
and then let us know or whatever. And I mean, and if it becomes urgent, just raise your
Right.
non-gun hand
Right.
and just let us know. But that's fine. But yeah,
Yeah.
all that management is a thing with that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't know if I would, like, how heavy I would go into like etiquette with a first timer, but there's
Right.
some basics that they're going to need to know. And I think it'll be a little
Yeah.
contextual too. Like, because if you go to some other, your
Mhm.
local public gun range or indoor range, they're going to have their rules and things they
Right.
want you to follow. So you'll want to follow them,
Right.
etc.
And that's
But
one of the other things I see from the deeply embedded hobbyist. Okay, folks don't tend to walk into a Tom Givens class as they're like his traveling road shows as like their first exposure to formal training,
true.
or a Dave Spalding or a Gabe White, or uh, Carl's traveling road shows. Carl Wren. Okay, there's a difference when Carl is on the road teaching a class to high-end hobbyists to KR Training teaching this is a gun class. It's completely different groups in those classes.
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. We, in fact, yeah, we definitely, our intro classes, we have a very different mindset and approach. But when we talk like our AT6 advanced handgun, it's like everybody who comes to that class, they've been here multiple times to know this, and we can run a much, I don't want to, it's going to sound bad to say a looser ship, but it's not that it's loose. It's that we've seen all these people before. They're they're repeat customers or clients. They've been around. We know how they're going to behave. We know how they're going to act. They know the rules. They know how to act and how to do things. So we can run a little differently than you would ever run. Like, yeah, these are first time beginners, don't know a thing, never been here before, don't know us, don't know nothing. And you're going to definitely approach it differently. But still, it doesn't mean we get lax. It just means you can take a different approach because the context is different.
Right.
You know,
and all that for the high-end hobbyist that tends to look down on the people that don't know the things that we think that we should know. Well, how did you get to the point that you are now? You had to start off somewhere.
I have a Y chromosome. That's all I need.
Yeah. There you go.
So
anything else on the hard skills that you think?
But yeah, yes. So to get then just really to the shooty parts of hard skills, ultimately what I like, again, it comes down, I think, also first, I need to understand the context of what the person is wanting. If the person is wanting this for, self-defense, or if they're wanting this for competition, well, that's two different things, right? But again, let's assuming, this is a personal defense thing, since that's the context we're talking about. For me, I think at this point, the biggest skill that I would really want to ultimately like spend my time in incremental building blocks working and building up to is that ability to, that draw to first acceptable hit skill. If there is any one thing, it would be that. And being able to do that somewhere out to now, I've kind of refined. I know that I said, a short distance, but I've kind of expanded that out to a slightly longer distance of, I think about 10 yards is, I think, is a good spot now. And the reason I think 10 yards is a good spot, but for many people, or I should say many people, their first notion or thought about getting a gun isn't concealed carry. It's home defense, right? That's for many people. Oh, I want a gun to defend my home, right? Because they get that context. It's a more comfortable and easier context to accept than now I'm walking around in public with a gun kind of thing, right? And so thinking that's with that being a thing, Um, if you look at many modern houses nowadays, they all have the great room. And if you look at the great room, you look at floor plans for houses now, and they have so much open floor plan that you can have, 10, 12, 15 yard distances within your house very easily. So I think that there's a utility in going out to about 10 yards, because if nothing else, 10 yards is such a wonderful magical distance of, it's not close, it's not really far, but like 7 to 10 yards, in fact, really 7 to 15 are really kind of an interesting pocket, especially around 10 yards to shoot at, because like, you got to have your sights, you got to have your trigger right. Otherwise it will show. You flub it at 3 yards, you may be able to get a little away with it at 7 yards, but 10 yards, really got to have all the things. And I think that's good because it really starts to reinforce the notion of sighted fire and the importance. Because we, in fact, just a couple weeks ago, had a student in class, and the student was just drilling it out at 3 yards. Great. And they started getting back to 7 yards, and they weren't able to hit squat. And then realizing it's just like, oh, you're not aiming.
Yeah.
And it really reinforces. So I think it starts to get to reinforce it. So for me, I think if there's really one mechanical skill that I want to build up, it's would be that they walk away with being able to get a good draw to first acceptable hit, that 7 yards on the 8-inch circle on like an IDPA or a Rangemaster Q, or if you use I really like, I know this is on brand, but I really like KR Training's KR T2 target that we have, because we really designed that to be very anatomically correct in size and shape and placement of zones. So and that's a free download. Anybody can download that and print it up. Just make sure you print it on 11 by 17 paper when you do, or don't, have a really, really hard target, whatever you want. But at least that kind of thing of hitting in that zone and being able to do that, that's what I would love someone to be able to walk out with, being able to do. So safety, basic manipulations, and that draw to first acceptable hit skill would be really, really crucial things in my book.
All right. In the remaining time, let's go over the course of fire.
Okay. So what I do, so the big things in this course of fire, it's actually interesting. I'm on version 3 of the course of fire right now. Because I came up with something that was very mechanical, like on paper, this looked really good. It hit everything in terms of the math and the things I wanted. But I got on the range to run it, and like, oh my gosh, this is such a pain in the tuchus to run. So I took some feedback from Carl toward simplification. And so it's now 25 rounds. It was 30, it's now 25 rounds. So if you want to, 1 box of ammo, and you can shoot it twice. And one thing that I really liked, and this is actually from John Hearn. He speaks in his Who Wins, Loses, and Why. He talks a lot about overlearning. And so I think that there's a lot of, you'll see in this, that there's a lot of overlearning and a lot of stress on that draw to first acceptable hit skill. So just reading this out here, the first shot is 10 yards. You start hands at sides, and you draw and fire 2 to the body in 4 seconds. And this implies concealment in this, both hands and all that. Oh, I should also say this. Let me back up a minute. One thing about the assessment is that it is meant to be an assessment of use of handgun in a defensive situation. When I originally was doing my thinking, it was always around the private citizen. And I've changed my thinking to just be around, the good law-abiding citizen, because it doesn't really matter whether you're a private citizen in concealment gear or you're a cop in duty gear. Really, the standard of performance is really ultimately the same, because it's still someone trying to do horrible things to you, and you need to stop. So at this point, I'm saying the gear that you shoot should be your carry gear, whatever that is, whatever you're, if it's that you're in a full duty rig and that's how that's fine. That's what it is. And I would also recommend that this was shot with your carry ammo. I know that's expensive, but if we have the notion of, you rotate your carry ammo every 6 months or 12 months or whatever you do, hopefully you've got a little bucket building up of, old carry ammo that then you could use, right? Yeah. Just so it helps replicate the recoil. Because again, this is about trying to see, can you do what you're doing? And also with the carry gear, it's important because I don't want people doing the thing like, well, I'll shoot it with the Glock 34, but I carry, a Glock 42 or something like that, right? No. Shoot with what you carry. It's got to be your carry gear, because this is what you're going to carry and trust your life with. You better be able to perform with it. Like I can tell you right now, like I've been carrying a P365 with an XL grip on it, and I can't shoot it as fast as I can shoot like a full-size gun.
Yeah.
But I still want to know, but I still can shoot. I can, clean this fine. I shot the match at TATCON with the 365, right? Because like that's what I'm going to carry. Make sure I can work with it, right? So you can do a little equipment vetting with it. But anyways, so all that. So back to this, it's starting at 10 yards. So hands at sides and draw 2 to the body in 4 seconds. And what I like about this is that it starts you at 10 yards. So if you're cold, and this is what you have to perform on demand, hopefully that's going to make you feel a little pressure, or if it doesn't make you feel pressure and you nail it, then you're probably beyond minimally competent, right? But 10 yards, it's going to be a little pressure. It's going to be a little thing to do that. In 4 seconds, as I've seen it pan out with my beta testers and such, has worked out fairly well at making things go. But it's at 10 yards, because again, most of the stuff isn't happening at longer distances. It's mostly in shorter distances. So a little heavier emphasis on 5 and 3 yards. So we go to 7 yards then, and starts 7 yards, hands at sides, 3 to the body in 4 seconds. Then from 7 yards, hands starting up in a fence position, and then it's drawn 1 to the body in 2.5 seconds. And then this next one is going to be from 7 yards, hands on phone, 1 to the body in 2.5 seconds. And that's something we got from you, actually, was like, to use like an old empty ammo tray or something like that as your phone. And I just tell people, like, look, use the phone, put the phone in your hand, whatever way you use the phone. If that's, landscape mode with 2 thumbs texting, or if it's to your ear and talking, or holding in one hand and tapping on it with your index finger with your other, I don't care what it is. And if you normally have it down at your belly button when you're looking, or if you have it held up, in front of your face vertically, so you can, keep up and looking around you, I don't care what it is. Whatever your phone mode of starting is, to do that. And then, it's drop the phone and then draw and 1 to the body in 2.5 seconds. I added in this notion of the different start positions with our hands, because that's life. And these days, especially, having a phone in your hand is a ridiculous amount of our lives. I know we all want to think that I'm not on my phone that much. Yes, you are. You're on it. The phone is in your hand a lot more than you think, right? And so that's a very real thing, I think, especially for, again, us enthusiasts or whatever, we may know better, but again, this is not aimed at the enthusiasts that know better. It's about helping the people get to learn that. So understanding the notion of you have things in your hands and that you should drop them, and to start putting that skill in and putting that in. I think that's, like, ask me 10 years ago, I may not have thought this, but nowadays, especially on the phone thing, oh yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that empty ammo tray.
Yeah.
I debuted that in the very first Rangemaster reunion in a video. And it's amazing how fast that spread through the firearms training world. And I got like all kind of emails and messages like, I've been trying to come up with a way to do this for forever.
Dude,
it's like, well, it's cheap. It's cheap. Everybody brought them with them.
Right. Everyone's got them.
It's the same size as an iPhone.
Right. It's perfect. I mean, it's great. It's an excellent idea. And yeah, when I saw, got that from you, and it's just like, oh man, this is perfect. I mean, if you want to use your real phone and drop it, go right ahead. But the ammo tray is just brilliant, dude. So thank you for that idea. So we do that. So then, but it's just those 3 at 7 yards. So then it moves into 5 yards. And at 5 yards, now the next additive thing that gets put in here is a sidestep. So on the draw, it's on the beep, you should sidestep left or sidestep right. I don't care, but just sidestep and then, draw and shoot. And I add in a bit of movement because, it's a combination of a couple things there that, what's better, to shoot or to not get shot? Not get shot, right? So movement is good to help with that. And I know that a lot of people have this poo-pooing on the notion of just taking the sidestep, right? But again, we're trying to make people minimally competent. I want them to start getting used to the notion of that sidestepping is a thing and why is it important. And I will always remember, it was Tom Givens. He's like showing you here, like, putting your hands up and make it like that. I don't know. I'm trying to find the right way to describe this for people who are only listening, not seeing. But it's like that camera thing where you put your thumbs together and you make like a visual little, like with your hands, you look through with your hands a box. So you're simulating tunnel vision kind of thing. And I always remember Tom calling it a what the fuck moment. That's what you want to give, when you sit there and you're in at these up to 5 yards, maybe 7-ish or so kind of distances. If someone's got tunnel vision and you just step to the right or left, you've disappeared now. You stepped out of their field of view, and they're going to have to reset themselves and reorient and figure out where they are, which buys you time, which could give you what you need. So that's a good thing. Or if nothing else, just, incoming bullets have the right of way. So just getting off the X is a good thing. And like I said, we can talk about things like, well, you should really take long steps like this, or, do, J hooks or other kinds of movement or moving, it's like, okay, cool. That's later. I want to get people minimal. Let's just introduce the notion of at least getting their feet to do something, right? So let's start with a side step.
And interesting that you say that. For Science released a study a couple of weeks ago that dealt with people moving, if they haven't been forced to do it in training, move their feet and turn their head, that they don't do it for real. Yeah.
So we'll spend time at 5 yards, and it starts with, again, just some draw to first acceptable hit. So hands at sides, step, draw, one of the body in 2.5 seconds. 5 yards, fence, step, one of the body, 2.5. 5 yards, phone, step, one of the body, 2.5 seconds. Then from 5 yards, you'll hands at sides, step, 3 to the body in 3.5 seconds. And then from 5 yards, hands at sides, step, 2 to the body, 1 to the head in 4 seconds. So that starts introducing the notion of obviously needing to change speed. It's, the failure to stop drill, that whole shebang starts getting introduced here. Then we move to 3 yards, and it's kind of much the same. So 3 yards, hands at sides, step, 1 of the body in 2 seconds, fence, 1 of the body in 2 seconds, phone, 1 of the body in 2 seconds. And then hands at sides, step, 3 to the body in 3 seconds. And then the last string is step, 2 to the body and 1 to the head in 3.5 seconds. And the standard is to pass is that, since it's all about acceptable hits, it's either you hit or you didn't. Shots over time, that's you didn't hit, right? If it's supposed to be a headshot or a body shot, where it's supposed to hit, you didn't hit that, it's, so it's either acceptable or not. And you just count them up, and there's 25 total. And if you get 23 out of the 25, that's a pass. That's 92%. I mean, you don't want to go with a standard of 90%, but you can't really get 90%. That'd be like 22.7 hits or whatever. So I figured bump it up a little bit, and 23 out of 25 to pass. So.
Are you running these individually on a timer, or are you doing them as people on the line with a whistle?
So far, I haven't used this in class yet. I've still been just developing this and running it with beta tests. And the beta tests have varied. A lot of times I have run it just as a group and just see if everyone's making it under the part-time, cool. But certain people, because I've wanted certain bits of data, I've definitely had the individuals run it and see what the individuals have ended up scoring, because that's helped me validate data and performance metrics and things like that. I had Dave Rychek. He ran it for me by himself and gave me all of his times on all the strings and how he did. And that was a good, valuable bit of data, because Dave also finished top 16 in the shoot off and all that. He did last year as well. And I think he's a master class USPSA shooter. Dave's really good. So that he's able to show me here's what a high performer is. And because Dave was like, yeah, it was really easy. I'm like, I would expect it to be easy for you. You're not the target for this, but that's, if it was hard, that would have told me that my numbers aren't correct. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So that's the basic idea of what, like I said, looking at all the math, looking at the data, doing the math on things like using Carl's formulas and things like that. And then a little bit of fuzziness, because real math on 5 yards was 2.3 seconds and 7 yards was 2.7 seconds, but ain't nobody got time for anything but ones, fives and zeros. So, so there's, that little bit of that. And this right now, like I said, this is a version 3. I still debate on a number of things with this. Should there be one-handed shooting? Is one-handed shooting a minimum skill? Now, I think that we can agree that two-handed shooting is at least, you have to use at least one hand to shoot the gun, right? You have to use at least one. And with two, you tend to have, you're able to shoot a little faster, a little more accurately because you have a more stable platform in order to be able to shoot from. But is one-handed? Because if you think about things like Carl made a point to me that he's like, yeah, well, you watch a lot of the videos and you see so many people who end up going and shooting one-handed. I'm like, yeah, but are they shooting one-handed because they're choosing to shoot one-handed because that's the right thing? Or are they shooting one-handed because they just don't know any better and that's suddenly what they did, right? But you could argue then, but then does that mean that maybe we should introduce the notion and start teaching them about that? Because then they have an awareness and they're more likely to, now that you've started introducing it, they may be more likely to actually learn the skill and become good at the skill. So if they have to use it, they'll be better. But then does that take away from, you've got that 4 hours to teach somebody, and now does it take away from that time? So I don't know. It's definitely one that I debate a lot, and I'm not sure still where to come down. The first version of this had some one-handed shooting in it. I took it out. I think I'm putting it back in. I don't know. So I'd love to hear input on it. That's what I want feedback. I definitely want to know. This is a big discussion point.
Sure. Anything on this topic that I have not asked you about that you would like to address?
I think the biggest thing, just to elaborate on what I just said, was that I don't attest to have the answer. I'm not saying that any of what I'm putting forth, whether it's the definition, well, the notion, the definition, how it breaks down, and even this, assessment, I'm not saying that they are the answer or even an answer. I'm just, at this point, I'm trying to find an answer. I am trying to understand what this might be. I think that there's a lot of merit in having it defined so that we can train people better. We can give people, we can ensure people have a realistic knowledge of their skill and ability and what it, quote unquote, do I have what it takes to get the job done? But like I said, I don't know truly what the answer is yet, but I'm having a lot of fun and interest in exploring it. And I would love to hear from other people what they think. I mean, if I'm full of it, I want to hear that I'm full of it. If my numbers are wrong, I want to hear that my numbers are wrong. But I want to hear, but if you're going to say that, like, you need to then, give me some good data and arguments and discussion back why. Don't just, this is not the comment section of the internet. I'm not interested in that kind of crap.
Yeah.
But I really do want to know. I really do want to hear from other people what it's about. So this is I hope that this can just be a beginning of discussion and exploration of this topic. And so if y'all got things, any listeners out there, want to talk about this more, to hit me up. I'm on all the social medias and out there and all that stuff. And I'd love to hear what people have to say on it. So,
all right. How do they hit you up? What's your best contacts?
So if you want to hit me, so for me, I tend, the nickname that I go by online is Hsoi, Hsoi. And used to be, I could say that, yeah, if you just Google the word soy, you'll get me. But now there's a group in Indonesia that are a bunch of Honda scooter owners. So I've got a lot of Indonesians, like Honda scooter owners, that like to follow me and things like that, because there are all these Honda scooter owners of Indonesia groups out there. It's a neat little bike, I will say, but if you set those aside and filter those out, soy will find me, or sometimes I go by soy sauce, because that's what I was able to get. But you can find me like on my, so like I started blogging again, and that's just blog.hsoi.com. You can email me at hsoi@hsoi.com. You can find me on Facebook under that. You can find me on Instagram as soy sauce, and you can come see me lift weights, because that's all I ever do. That's all I ever do on social media, is go to the gym. But that's ways you can get a hold of me and all that. And of course, you can go to KR Training, the krtraining.com website. There's also KR Trainings on Facebook and all those good things if you want to get at stuff. But I think that covers all the ways that you can try to get at me. I'm out there. I'm findable.
All righty. Well, John, as always, I love talking with you, and I love talking about this topic. And it's always fun to hear your point of view on things.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on and giving me a platform here to be able to talk about this. So I appreciate it. And it's always a joy talking to you and seeing you, man. So I appreciate it, brother.
Well, thank you. I hope we get some good feedback from this. That's beyond, yeah. Like, as John said, you got to have some data to back up what you talk. Go ahead.
I should add, It is my plan at the so Carl and I have the print book, the Strategy and Standards book. I also have an ebook called Drills, Qualifications, Standards, and Tests. It's free. You can get it by going to the KR Training website, and you just sign up for the mailing list, and then we're able to send it to you as a free download. And in that, I have not only a collection of like my favorite drills, quals, standards, and tests, but I am going to be updating that with all of this information, the assessment and all my talk from that I gave at TATCON. And I actually have it pulled up on my machine, on my computer here right now, all the Word doc and everything is all up and open so I can start on the editing process. I do want to get that up and written and get that republished the way when I have that done with all this minimum competency stuff, the updated stuff added to it. Because you can find my old stuff in the book and on the blog and all that, but all this new stuff, including the assessment, will be in there. And when that's released to the world, we'll put it out over the mailing list and all of like, the KR Training social medias and my personal social medias. It'll all be out there. People can get it that way. So
Cool. And audience, I got to say, somebody broke the rule. Somebody shared the link to the show with a dumb friend. And we got to remind you all that we're only allowed to share the link with our smart friends. Because I got a question after recent episodes like, okay, somebody gave this to a dumb person. And remember, we can't do that. But I want to thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. I hope that the show will get back on a regular production schedule like we have been with the episodes coming out every week. That's got several fun ones planned coming up from TATCON, and then we'll get back with some of the back into the history and development of firearms training. So there's a plan on where we're going. Just hope we can get them all put together and do it. And as always, thank you for your time.